Welcome to the fourth episode of the Clive experiment. I'm going to start off today's podcast with a thought for the day. And the first thought for the day is from Ben Shapiro, and he states, when government becomes the only thing that holds us together, when government replaces community and civil society, the result isn't greater solidarity and consistency, but rage and dissolution. And I saw this, he posted it a few weeks ago, but I saw this and I really thought to myself how telling it is in this current day and age, how separated and segregated we are, and how everybody looks to the government to solve our problems, when actually most of the problems can be solved within our communities and civil society. The second thought for the day is on the 6th of December last year, Mr. Beast, a renowned YouTuber, posted a poll on Twitter saying, if someone offered you $10,000, but if you take it, a random person on the earth dies, would you take the $10,000? And scarily, 55.5% of the nearly 2 million people who voted said yes. That means 833,000 people would have died for the net value of 8.3 billion. Now, that is a scary disconnect in society where people think that that is something that they could socially say and get away with. And not even just get away with it, but it's scary that that's the way people are thinking. That is the fabric of our society right now. 55% of people would rather take 10 grand thinking that somebody they don't know is going to die. It's real food for thought. Right, so today I'll give you a quick introduction in what we're going to do in today's show. So first of all, we're going to start off with the book club. This week we have two books that I read. Roots of Human Behavior by Barbara J. King and Behavioral Economics by Scott Hurtle. Then we're going to go into my conclusion on how governments and large corporations are using our behaviors against us. Then we're going to go through some finances for our country in our section, Do You Know These Facts About the Country's Finances? Then we're going to go into some scary figures, some scary NHS costs that highlight exactly where society is going wrong. And perhaps maybe we can start thinking about how we can solve these issues. And then lastly, I'm going to start doing this every week. I'm going to start talking about something, either personal development, we've done, goal setting, and this week I'm going to do intermittent fasting because health is so important. And in this day and age with the NHS crumbling around us, we should really be taking ownership of our health to make sure that we're in the best shape so that we don't need to go to the doctors. Because at the moment, it's very difficult to do. And there's simple things we could do to improve our life. So without further ado, let's begin. So I began this reading journey to gain a deeper understanding of the world around me, to learn how I can improve myself and make a positive impact. I am particularly interested in studying human behavior, politics, personal development, and the wisdom of philosophers to progress my journey in becoming the best version of myself. Today I talk about two books and my conclusions that I made from reading these two books. So the first book I read was The Roots of Human Behavior by Barbara J. King. The Roots of Human Behavior is a book that explores evolutionary origins of human behavior by examining the behavior of our closest living relatives. The book discusses how behaviors of primates such as chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and the bonobos can provide insight into the evolution of human behavior. Topics covered in the book include a range of the evolution of communication, language, social organization, aggression and cooperation, and the development of culture. The book argues that by studying the behavior of primates, we can get a deeper understanding of the forces that have shaped human behavior and the ways in which our behavior is like and different from those other primates. And the second book I read was Behavioral Economics. Now, behavioral economics is the field of study that combines psychology and economics to understand how people make decisions. It determines how people's behaviors deviate from the predictions of traditional economic models and how this deviation can be explained by factors such as emotions, bias, and social influences. Behavioral economics is a field that examines how people make decisions and how those decisions deviate from the predictions of traditional economic models. From what I've read, from reading these two books, I've deduced a couple of things that I think is going on in the world around us. And I believe government and big corporations are using behavioral economists to achieve the desired outcomes. In recent years, corporations and governments have begun to use behavioral economics to gauge public resistance to change. They use insights from behavioral economics to design policies, products, and services that are more likely to be accepted by the public. For example, companies may use behavioral economics to design pricing strategies that consider how people respond to different prices and discounts. We see this every year at the Boxing Day sales, where things aren't actually cheaper, but because they tell us they are, we get excited. Governments may use behavioral economics to design policies to encourage people to save for retirement or to reduce energy consumption. We see this every day in our current economy. Behavioral economics can also be used to understand why people resist certain changes. And they use behavioral economics to design interventions that can overcome this resistance. For example, a company wants to introduce a new product but finds that people are resistant to change. It may use a behavioral economics model to understand the underlying reasons why people are resistant to change, and then design marketing strategies to address these concerns. Similarly, if a government wants to introduce a new policy but finds people are resistant, it may use behavioral economics to understand the reason and redesign the policy or redesign a situation to make it more beneficial for people. Now, we see this a lot in the way government speaks to people. They always talk about what they're doing, but they never talk about what they haven't done. And they use the media to push us down a certain narrative, to frenzy us, or to almost sensationalize an issue. And then they can slip what they want and from beneath us. Now, how are we being manipulated? If the powers like the WEF, the Bill and Melinda Foundation, and our own governments use our understanding of human behavior against us, this could have severe consequences. One possible outcome is that the powers that be could manipulate individuals and groups to act against their best interests. For example, they could use techniques such as persuasion, manipulation, deceit to influence people's thoughts, emotions, and actions. Now, we have seen this time and time again in the media. We've seen people getting forced to have vaccinations by putting social pressures on them, forced to have vaccinations on by putting, financial pressures on them. We saw people being manipulated into getting vaccinations in America by offering them burgers and donuts. We saw this when they locked us down, and they locked us in our little environments and sort of kept us under control. We see these manipulations all the time. We see the manipulations constantly. We see the manipulations in the segregations of the sexes. Masculinity being toxic and femininity being toxic and becoming feminist. And we see it with the LGBTQ population versus the normal mainstream population who just, are heterosexual and are just happy to be that way. But essentially, all of these things aren't really issues unless you use them to your advantage. And this is where it gets really scary. Because what a government or a power like the WEF or these big foundations like the Bill and Melinda Foundation and now Jeff Bezos's foundations, these are all focused on the specific agenda, and that specific agenda might not align with our personal values. Now, by giving, let's say for right now you were a conservative in the UK, and the conservative government said we're going to ban all striking for everybody because it's not conducive to the morale of the country. It's not conducive to the public interest. Now, a conservative who thinks that, I don't really agree with these strikes, that's a great idea. Let's make it illegal so people can't strike. But now, 10 years down the road, the conservatives aren't in the government. Your government is no longer in power. The world has changed, and the far left Socialist Party is now in power, and they're exacting their beliefs that you don't agree with. But you can no longer protest, because the protest now is illegal. But it was fine when you agreed with the mandate, and that's why we can't create these laws, because it's far too easy for governments to change, for powers to change, for people to slide into power that do not share our beliefs. And if we lock ourselves up and we lock ourselves down so we can't fight these powers, or we can't open our mouths and say what we don't agree with, this is a very dangerous thing for society. And we need to be very careful that things don't change for the worst. So here's another example. So what if a powerful organization uses our human behavior to create a policy and a system to exploit or harm a certain group of people? For example, they could use our behavioral insight to design a system that disproportionately benefits the powerful while exacerbating the inequality and injustice. You know, like I just said, creating laws to stop people protesting, laws to hold people without trial. We see that now with the Andrew Tate, who's been locked up for months now on charges that nobody has actually shown any concrete evidence for, because he's going against society's narrative. Whether he's innocent or not innocent, I don't know. But the point that I'm trying to make is we're holding these people without trial. What about the segregation of people through philosophies? By driving a wedge between people, by saying being a man, being a masculine man is toxic. But at the same time, what about being a feminine woman who wants to just have children, you know, is against the feminists? Now, I'm all for everybody having their own opinion. I'm all for everybody fighting for what they believe in. But sometimes we have to accept that it's not a war. There are women out there that are killing it in the commercial industry. There are women CEOs out there. Yeah, there's not as many as men CEOs, but ultimately a majority of women want to have children and be a family. And you can't have children and be a family and be ultra competitive on the business front. Not even as a man. If you prioritize your family and your time with your family, can you be ultra competitive and become a CEO and spend 80 to 100 hours a week at work? Because your family life will suffer. So everybody has to make decisions on what they want to do. And what we have to accept is that predominantly men decide to do that and women don't. Women are happy to predominantly to form the support role, and men are predominantly happy to go out and earn the money. And that worked for us for generations. And it wasn't up until, you know, the feminism started in the 60s that things like this started to become a major issue. And we don't actually know the full extent of changing the way our society was run is going to affect us in the future. Now, there's things like, at the moment, for all the fertile women in the country, their fertile ratio is currently 1.5%. That means for every 3 women in this country, there's only 2 babies being born, which is a massive population decline, which will cause problems with our finances in the future, which we'll discuss a bit later on. Additionally, I just want to go back onto, if the wrong powers use these understandings of our behavior against us and created surveillance systems to monitor and control people's actions, monitor their thoughts and emotions, this would lead to a loss of privacy and freedom, and the chilling effect would be the dissolution of free speech. Now, we already see this. We already see governments doing this. We already see people manipulating the social media and making sure certain voices aren't heard. We see manipulation in our TV screens. We see it all the time. And now it's going even worse with social scoring and these vaccine passports and carbon footprint scoring and CBCDs, where they can control where we're going to spend our money and how we spend it. And again, all of these things sound great. If you had a person who was an alcoholic and you programmed his money so it couldn't buy alcohol, I mean, the idea behind that is great. But ultimately, it's great as long as you're on the right side of it. There's always a point for somebody to be on the wrong side of something. And then we have to accept that we can't control everybody and we can't think for everybody. We have to give everybody their free will. And that is the most important thing. And that is my absolute goal now, is to ensure that people have as much free will as possible. Freedom, that's another definition that we have to quantify. But free will, the ability to make our own decisions, the ability to construct our lives the way we want to construct it. These are the important things, and these are what we have to be mindful of. And the only way we can observe these manipulations is to educate ourselves and to read these books and to talk about what we think. To talk about how things like governments and the WEF and the Bill and Melinda Foundation are trying to manipulate the world and steer the world in a way that they want. And we cannot and should not give them the power to do these acts that take away our free will and our freedom. There's the understanding of our human behavior against us. It could end up in the oppression of individuals and groups, the loss of privacy, freedom, and democracy. Now, we already see this now. 40-year-old men like myself feel like we can't go out and say, do you know what? I'm happy to be a man. I'm happy to be a masculine, healthy, strong man. I'm happy to go and work, and I'm happy to look after my family, and I'm happy to support my family. But I don't care about everybody else's movement. I don't care about, the LGBTQ movement. I don't care. As long as they're not affecting me in my life, I'm not bothered. I don't care if the cashier in my local shop is any one of those acronyms. I don't care. As long as when I go to the shop, they're pleasant, we have our mutual civil exchange, and we move on. I don't care what people do in the privacy of their own bedroom. I don't care what people do in any other facet of their life. What I care about is when it gets forced on me. And at the point now, I feel like I'm eating it for breakfast every single day. I turn on the telly, I see it. I turn on the computer, I see it. I go through my phone, I see it. I have my beliefs, and I'm entitled to my beliefs. I'm entitled to believe that there's only two genders, male and female. But I'm also accepting of any male who wants to be a female, or any female who wants to be a male, or any of the other acronyms. I don't care. I'm very happy for you guys to go and be happy and live your best version of your life. But when I have to change my version of my life to make your version of life better, that is where I draw the line. And at that point, when my child's education is being affected by people talking about, bills about, people changing their sexes, like in Scotland now, I've got my son's teacher, my son's 11, his teacher's busy telling him how it's disgusting that the UK has blocked this. Our family doesn't agree. So for my son to be educated this in school, I think that's unfair for my family's heritage. But I'm not going to go and cause a big stink. I'm going to educate my son and take responsibility for my son. And he can make his own decisions. If he agrees with that, he can agree with it. But if he agrees with my mindset, or he sees my mindset, he sees how I live my life, and he wants to become like his father, which is traditionally what happened. Boys follow the route of their father, and girls follow the route of their mother. That is tradition. That is how it's been since the dawn of time, since we walked out of the primordial ooze. Children learned from their mothers and fathers, and they became versions of them. And to think that the state and the WEF and these big foundations are going to start trying to manipulate us and how we think and try and change the world. It's time for the center people, everybody that's just down the line, that just wants to have a normal life, that get up and go to work. We're happy to work. We're happy to do everything that needs to be done. But at the same time, we don't want to be floundered and bombarded with all this other stuff that has nothing to do with us. So we have to rise up, and we have to start talking, and we have to start bringing all this up, and we have to start going, this is not acceptable. I have no problem with what you want to do with your life. No problem at all. I just don't want to eat it for breakfast every single day. And again, governments come and go, and we all believe in a government, and every time a government comes and takes a power from us, and they create a bill and they make it so we can't protest, the next government comes, might not be a government that we agree with, and we've lost those powers to protest and fight against the government. We're moving closer and closer to a 1984 type regime where politics is fictional. It doesn't really matter who's in power or not. The deep state, the organizations behind the politicians are controlling the shots. Politicians come on, they don't actually make any differences whatsoever. If you look at what things are like when they start and things are like when nothing changes. They don't improve anything. They don't restructure anything. They don't make anything better. They don't make anything worse. They just marginally take control. Over and over again, the cycle continues, and they take more and more control away from us. And it's time to start saying, we need to reshape the way the world is. We've had a long, long time like this, and it's been great. It's got us to whole new levels, but now it's time to start thinking that everybody's educated. It's totally different if you lived in a world where 50% of the population was educated and 50% of the population wasn't educated. What we need to do is we need to spend our money on education and make sure every single person in this country gets a grade A education. That is the most important thing. And then once everybody is highly educated and they've got a grade A education, they should be able to make decisions for themselves. And when I say education, I'm not just talking about English, maths and science. I'm talking about education and how to manage their finances. I'm talking about it. Children go to school and they learn all these important things, but they don't learn how to manage their finances. And the world expects the parents to teach that. And I totally agree with that, which is great if your parents are good with their finances. Then you'll grow great. You'll learn how to manage your finances correctly and you'll learn important stuff. But what if your parents are bad at finances and the only education you get is from school and how your parents manage their finances? Your life could end up in that badly managed system. So it's important that education not only teaches our children them what's important, it teaches them the important life skills that could be missing from the average home. And I'm not saying we have to teach them values and everything. I'm saying just make sure that when our children leave school, they're able to make the right decisions. And then government can take a step back. And government can start focusing on the greater good rather than the controlling of the masses. Government should not be our first port of call when we've got a problem. Government should be our last port of call. Government should be there to enforce property rights, legal disputes, and people should be sorting out the rest for themselves. We should be that well educated that we have skills and we can go and find any types of work. And if we can't find any types of work, we can start thinking about how we can create work. And we should be putting all our energy into that rather than fighting about who's left and who's right, who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. We should stop fighting about LGBTQ plus persecutions when they're not getting that. There's plenty, they can go and get a job anywhere. Nobody persecutes anybody anymore. Nobody cares. We're that liberal now. We're that liberal society now. Nobody cares. You can do anything you want. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody or affect anybody, you should have the right to do anything you want. That's with your body, your mind, whatever you want. But ultimately, responsibility for your life, for your welfare, should be on you. Not the government, not your parents, not anybody, you. And you need to be educated to make those right decisions. And that's what's so important. We need to get to the point where people are making the right decisions. We need people to make the right decisions for their lives. And we can only do that by educating them. By educating them to think for themselves and teaching them that there's only one person that's responsible for their well-being, and that's themselves. Right. So, do you know these facts about our country's finances? So, our national budget, which is the total receipts we receive every year, is 1,053 billion. Well, this is what it was in 21-22. Now, of that, the government spends on these various sections. So we spend 6% of that money on defense, 12% on education, 22% on healthcare, and then the list goes down. But for today, I just really want to focus on the two, education and healthcare. Now, these are the two most important things that I've identified in UK society that we believe we deserve and we should have. Everybody should be entitled to a great education, and everybody should be entitled to healthcare. And we're very happy to pay for that. As a nation, we're happy to pay that money. I'm happy every month to pay that money to make sure that when my child needs to go to the dentist, there's a dentist there and the quality of service is great. However, when my child needs to go to the dentist and there's no dentists available, and I have to take my child to a private dentist because he needs a filling, and it's going to cost me £400 on top of the money I pay every month into the NHS and the education system, then I start thinking to myself, this system is not working and I'm not getting the best from it. And if I'm not getting the best from it, hundreds of millions of people, well, the millions of other people in the country are not getting the best from it. So let's break it down. So the NHS gets 230 billion every year, which is 22% of our national expenditure. There is 68 million, nearly 69 million people in the country. That the NHS gets approximately £3,344 per person per year. Now, that is a lot of money. That is an incredible large sum of money, and that is a single biggest probably expense that the UK people make that I can think of. The problem is we're not getting anything for that money. And those of us that look after ourselves, those of us that are healthy, those of us that don't go to the doctors very often, those of us that don't have any long-term ailments, those of us that don't cost the system any money, we're not getting the full benefits out of that. So if I don't go to the doctor for 5 years, I've now paid £12,000 into the system. And I go to the doctor and I can't get an appointment to go see a consultant. I've got an issue and I need to go and see a consultant for 3 or 4 months. This is not how it should be. I think there's a better way that we could run the health service. And I need to work on that. But ultimately, I think we need to start saying to ourselves, the health service gets 22% of our total country's money. That is more money than any other thing except for social protection. We need to start thinking about how the NHS might be failing. It's not financial. There's another underlying issue there. The NHS is not failing because they haven't got the money. They're failing because the construction and the management and the way the NHS is structured is failing. So what do we ask ourselves? How much money is enough for the NHS? So here's an example of all the money the country raises. So these are all our public sector receipts. So we get 200 billion from income tax, 150 billion from national insurance, 50 billion from excise duties. Corporation tax is only 40 billion, which is interesting to see. VAT is 150 billion. Business rate is 24 billion. Council tax is 40 billion. Other taxes is 84 billion. And other non-taxes 88 billion. So that's how the country makes its money. What I find incredible is the country actually has 48% of our GDP as spending money. That means the country, every business in the country, everybody in the country, 2.2 trillion, 2,200 billion of sales every year, domestically and internationally. And somehow the UK government manages to acquire 1,053 billion of that, which is 48% of our total sales. So if you think about all the money that changes hands in the country, 50% almost comes back to the government. And the government invests that money in areas where it decides. Now, the NHS gets 10% of our national domestic product. And they get 22% of all public receipts. And they still can't manage good queues, doctor's appointments. There is a cultural problem there. I think we could give the NHS all the money in the world and it would still fail. Because there's a cultural problem within the NHS that we need to find out and we need to solve, and we need to come up with a structure that's going to improve this. And until people start talking about the NHS failing because of the people inside the NHS, it's not government. We need to stop blaming government for the NHS failing. It's the same as the education system. The education system gets 10%. We need to stop blaming government and stop blaming the system. How is the system designed? How is the system structured? And what do we have to do as a nation to make it better? And what do we have to accept the changes are going to be? So here's a few health and well-being statistics. Now, these are the scariest things, right? So NHS, again, I'm focusing on the NHS because at the moment it's the biggest topic and I think it's the biggest failure in our society. Currently, there were almost 700 deaths from high-strength painkillers like tramadol, codeine, oxycyclone, and that's 350 more. No, sorry, that's 350 fewer from 10 years ago. So in 10 years, we've gone from a society that only had 350 deaths. We're now having another 350 deaths on top of that in 10 years. Why are we giving out so many painkillers? Why is society getting so unhealthy, and why are we needing all these painkillers? Humans haven't changed for 10 years. What's the societal difference? What problem are we masking by just giving people pills? And this is another problem. Because everything's free, nobody cares about the money they're spending. Doctors don't seem to care about prescribing these harmful painkillers. Nobody seems to be doing the work. They seem to be just doing what's easy, and that's just giving out drugs. And the pharmaceutical companies must be loving this. Why are all these people on these painkillers? And if this is the case, maybe we should adopt a model like America where you can do cannabis or something which nobody dies from and is far cheaper and is a taxable potential. There's a Colorado model we could maybe follow or something. There's something we could do to reduce this amount of cost. The country spends $442 million a year on painkillers. That is an obscene amount of money. Surely people can't be in that much pain. There has to be an underlying issue. We need to start looking at what's causing all these health issues and start fixing them. And this is where the health service and the education system should be working together to solve the problem. If the health service and education, if the health service was identifying that people's health was really bad and we needed to focus on teaching people how to eat better, then they should be going to the education department and say, listen, we need to educate children because we've seen this massive increase in obesity, or we've seen this massive increase, and we need to now focus on these children because these are the future and we need to get this back down. Then we need to start focusing on adults, and we need to start re-educating people on how to live better lives. Education is the solution to everything, not painkillers. We need to stop people getting to this point. Again, alcohol. Alcohol is costing the NHS $3.5 billion every year. Now, I love a drink just as much as the next person. However, if you think about it, if it's costing $3.5 billion each year, just the NHS alone, the tax that the government is charging on alcohol should be going to cover those costs. Because ultimately, if that habit, we can't stop people drinking, and we should never stop people doing something they want. Freedom and free will are really important. However, if we can identify and we can quantify how much alcohol costs the NHS or society, because there's another point there where, alcohol causes loads of different issues. It causes, suicides, it causes deaths, it causes huge amounts. 63% of deaths were caused by alcohol between the ages of 55 and 64, or 45 and 64. If we can quantify that alcohol is causing all these things, we can quantify a value. If we can quantify a value, then we can quantify a tax. And then we can say, right, well, this tax is because this is how much it costs, and this money goes to the NHS to cover these health concerns. It'll do two things. The people that realize that it's not that great to do it too often will do it less. And the people that can't help themselves will pay more. And they'll essentially be paying for their own hospitalization. There's loads of areas where I think, this is another statistic. And again, I can't quantify. These are just various things that I've picked up off the internet. But they say that alcohol costs between 27 and 52 billion, costs the entire society between 27 and 52 billion. And I think the country only gets around 40 billion or 50 billion from the taxes on tobacco and alcohol. We need to adjust taxes for things that we can quantify are wrong. And if we can make these quantifications, if we can do this type of stuff, we can adjust the tax accordingly. But we should never ever stop people from living their lives. Free will is so important. Giving people the opportunity to make their own decisions is what makes life worth living. It's what gives people purpose. We can't take that away, but we can make sure that we fund it correctly. So in conclusion, the things that we've discussed today, we need to start being more aware of the things that are going on around us. There's certain trends, there's certain things that are happening that are changing the way we live our lives. And they're not always for the better. So what we need to do is we need to start being rational. We need to start being rational in our thinking and decide, what is it we see in front of us? What is it that the media are trying to get us to do? What is the action that they're trying to see us achieve? What is the action government want? And when we push these narratives, and we can see it all the time, when we push a narrative about, people not being able to get, to the doctors, or people not being able to, receive critical life-saving treatments. We need to understand why people can't do this. We need to start asking the questions: is what's changed? It can't be a financial issue. Things can't be financial issues all the time. It has to be a societal issue. And once we figure out the actual issue, maybe we can come up with a plan to solve the problem. And then we need to take control of our health. We need to start thinking about ways in which we can make ourselves more healthy and improve our health. The Western lifestyle is not necessarily conducive to good health. We can see it in the statistics. More and more people are on antidepressants. We can see it in the statistics. More and more people are on painkillers. We can see it in the statistics. More and more people are unhappy and going to the doctor and healthy. So we need to start doing the research, and we need to start learning what is healthy and what is not healthy. And we need to start being more responsible for our lives. And that brings today's podcast to an end. Thank you.